Through the Mayhem, the Sightly podcast series, bringing marketing industry leaders together to discuss the ever-shifting media landscape. Learn about the ins and outs of real-time marketing, brand safety, influencers, data privacy, technology, and so much more. All from industry experts with real experience, giving you the real answers. Now, let's break through the mayhem.
Welcome to Breaking Through the Mayhem, episode 24, hosted by Sightly. This is Adam Katz. I am very, very lucky today to have an industry legend, Sam Bloom, on with us today. Just before we kick off, Sam, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
You got it. First of all, thanks for having me out. All right, Sam Bloom. I lead partnerships here at PMG. A little bit of background. So the firm I ran, Camelot, we were acquired by PMG about 13 months ago. I was at Camelot for 20 years, leading all the digital until my two partners and I, we did a management buyout of Camelot, and then eventually, we're on through a process to sell. But prior to that, worked for Mark Cuban for 3.5 years at broadcast.com, helped start Blockbuster Online. Did some consulting before that, and in a big six consulting. So, lots of diversity, and a couple failed startups in there as well.
What do you think you learned from the transition from Camelot to PMG? What would you say has been the biggest learning for you?
Well, one is, first of all, I was always really excited to be in a tech forward, company, which is what PMG is. And so it's a lot of fun being in a company where, particularly in this day and age with AI and the things that are going on, I mean, if you can dream it, you can do it. And I think that's the first piece. It's been that piece of it's been a lot of fun. I think the second piece is, having been only a media guy, now I'm surrounded by tech, creative, SEO, a whole bunch of other different skill sets. And so I find that very stimulating. And then the other thing is, just going from, 170 person company to 1,000 person company. I mean, those are all new dynamics for me. And so learning how to do things at scale, it's been an interesting ride for me.
Wow. I had a question for you based on all that. Like, what happened at your time at Blockbuster? Why don't you tell everybody a little bit more? I feel like Blockbuster's become like a big meme over the years, but also people forget how actual revolutionary it really was and what it kind of turned everyone else into. But kind of tell us a little bit about Blockbuster.
Well, so so first of all, I think one is, our team is, if you ever want to read a great book, there's a book called Netflix. There's a journalist that covered the whole Blockbuster Netflix thing, and she wrote a book called Netflix, which turned into a podcast called From Business Wars, which turned into a movie called Netflix versus the World. And so, a lot has been written on this topic. I think the one thing that I would like to dispel that I think a lot of people don't understand, I mean, Blockbuster was certainly doomed in the end, but what people don't understand is Blockbuster was part of Viacom. And when Viacom spun off Blockbuster, it left Blockbuster with massive debt. And those debt covenants ultimately were the things that did Blockbuster ultimately. When you can't pay the note, things go south pretty quickly. But I joined Blockbuster. So Blockbuster had gone through kind of its first .com or .bomb, bust. And when I joined Blockbuster, it was after I'd been at broadcast.com. And, at the time when in the first kind of .com boom, Blockbuster had like 2 floors that were, people skateboarding around and on scooters. And it was like what you think of the .com thing. So by the time I got there, people were, had tired head on all things .com. And it was really about, how do we think about the business? And when I first got there, Netflix was a private company. And the first day I showed up, they handed me, basically some papers saying they had bought a DVD by mail company over a weekend, and my job was to run it. And they bought kind of a mom and pop operation very nice people, but it was no Netflix. And so it was basically a year to incubate that business. And, when I first got in, it took me a couple of weeks to kind of like get my arms around kind of what we were doing with this. And I went back to our CEO, John Antioco, and my boss was kind of Ed Stead, who's the general counsel. And I said, look, guys, it's like, we need to use this as a lab more than, this is not a launch pad. This is a lab and we need to learn about the business. And one of the first things we did in the early days was look at the customer file. I mean, at the time, the company that we bought was called DVD Rental Central. And I wanted to understand, the overlap with Blockbuster customers. And it was interesting on multiple fronts. The first thing I would tell you is it was interesting seeing the consumption, like what movies people watched in a subscription service versus what they watched at a Blockbuster. So if you remember walking into a Blockbuster, we had a new release wall. So we were all about the new releases. When I looked at the customer file in DVD Rental Central, it was all what we called back catalog, the stuff that was in the middle of the store and where there would be one or two copies. And that was the first head scratcher for me. And we didn't understand that behavior. That was different. I think the second thing is we made a lot of assumptions around when people made their entertainment decisions. And all the data and research we had said, people make a decision, 30 minutes before you walk into a Blockbuster, it's a movie night, right? Well, when you're in a subscription program like this, the way people did it is they would decide, Monday or Tuesday what they wanted, and the DVD would be mailed to them, and the DVD would be waiting for them on their DVD player. But that was foreign to us. Like, we didn't understand that. And the other piece is what we found is that these people wanted to consume a lot of content back to back to back. That was not the nature of Blockbuster because we had new releases. It was like, oh my gosh, that release is now in Blockbuster. So there were a lot of behaviors that were really different. And because when you're the 800-pound gorilla in the category, you look at these things, you're like, these are anomalies. These are not the way people are going to behave. Now, if I fast forward to today and you think about binging behavior on streaming and all those kinds of things, it all makes perfect sense to me. It did not make sense to me back then that you would, essentially pick content well before, you got to your TV. And because, when I was growing up, you watched whatever was on, like that's, you didn't. So there were a lot of things, but I think the final thing, when we looked at the customer bases, what we saw was that these kinds of DVD by mail services were sort of siphoning off what we'd call kind of heavy renters, and which was about 5 to 10% of the customer base. So we didn't think that much of it because I think we looked at those folks, they were over consuming and certainly loyal, but I think there were Blockbuster spent a lot of time thinking about what we call dissatisfiers. And what we didn't understand is that, returning a video is a massive dissatisfier. But we thought that we could get over that with new releases, and that's just not the case. And so that's, but look, a year of running that business, we learned a bunch of things. We could never compete on the acquisition cost that Netflix had. And no matter what we did, when you put a Blockbuster logo in front of people, they thought of it as a store, not as an online destination. And so, we thought we would have to rethink, everything, which we did. In the original business plan that I wrote, the idea was to have Blockbuster stores function as a distribution center, because if you know anything about a Blockbuster store, basically Monday through Thursday, there's not a lot of activity. So the idea was you could use the CSRs, the people that worked in the stores at those times, to basically stuff envelopes with DVDs. And we thought we could out Netflix because we had a network of, almost 3,000 stores, and we could literally overnight be a DVD by mail company. But what I underestimated is that the technology in the stores and the bandwidth of the stores, it was like the blue screens running, at the POS systems, and they had HughesNet satellite. lots of bandwidth going down, not a lot of bandwidth going up. So very confident it's a massive CapEx, project. And so we actually had to go get funding from Viacom for a massive tech upgrade. And when we went to go do that, we realized that we wouldn't even scratch the surface because there was so much, technology and bandwidth we had to put into a store. So we had to rethink how we were going to go to market. We couldn't use the stores initially. And so for the first year of the business, it was simply an online business, and it didn't fare well. But then Johnny Diaco, our CEO, got a pretty brilliant idea, was how do what we would essentially do is give people gift certificates, if you will, or certificates to rent in the store and get online, and that we can make a value proposition that was basically, when you think about the stores, you can get your new releases. When you think about the online, you can get your back catalog.
So you're starting to think about a loyalty program in some
That's
ways.
right. But also more importantly, it's like we knew Netflix couldn't compete with us on new releases. And so what a lot of people don't realize is when this was about the time when we eventually turned that little business that I ran, basically got shuttered. Blockbuster built up its own. We hired a big consulting firm, built out our own technology, and eventually went to market. That first year going market, it was simply Blockbuster Online. Then we started to add the stores in from a value proposition. It was like, you can come and rent in the store, or you could get it online all for one price.
Today you would have built your own retail media network,
100%. By the way, Blockbuster had a retail media network. Well, where I was going with this is, about that time, Netflix went public. And what most people don't realize is when Netflix went public, we had 2 quarters where we kicked the living daylights out of Netflix, and Netflix was almost dead. Because
it was like the Monday Night Wars in
That's
wrestling.
right. So, but then, look, when your financing runs dry and you can't continue spending like a drunken sailor, that's when, we took our foot off their throats, and we eventually got not beat, just beat badly.
Yeah,
so, incredible lesson.
What do you think? How'd you transition to Camelot? What's the backstory there? What would you say?
Better one.
What would you say? When you kind of tie that in, what would you say were the biggest things you learned in those experiences that you made sure not to bring to Camelot?
Well, that's funny. So one is, I wouldn't call my time at Blockbuster particularly successful. I'm not sure anybody at Blockbuster these days would say that either. But what happens is, so I ran business development, and I made a number of venture investments that did not go well. I sort of arm wrestled with the head of strategy to run the DVD by mail business, and I lost that. And so it was at that point I got approached about, hey, you'd be great in our ad agency. And I was like, huh, what? And so the CEO said, yeah, you should talk to Tom Camelot. He owns this agency called Camelot. They do our TV. He wants to start a digital team. So I was completely befuddled because I was basically being asked to leave. But so I met with Tom Camelot, who was the founder of Camelot. I instantly fell in love with him. And for about 7 months, we talked. And what Blockbuster and Camelot agreed to is that I would work at both companies for a year, and they would share my salary. And so for year one, I had an office at Blockbuster and an office at Camelot. And, at Blockbuster, I was closing out all my BD deals and my business development, relationships. Camelot, by day, I was, in ad server, trafficking ads, doing analytics, running campaigns, and doing it all on my own. And so for the first couple of years, I did everything myself. And Tom's son, Pat, along with our first hire, this guy named Alex Richter, who eventually was one of my partners. But I'll be honest with you, that was a career piece where I look back at the time, I had my tail between my legs. I felt that I'd failed at Blockbuster, and what I really wanted to do was learn a trade. And the reason I liked the agency a lot is I felt that I could do something, a repeatable process, and learn, but, get a process down, something, very hands-on that I can master. And there was enough creativity and enough change that kept it interesting, but the fundamentals were the same, which is every ad has to get traffic. You got to read analytics. And I kind of gamified it for myself because we had a lot of performance-oriented clients like Blockbuster, Red Southwest Airlines, and some others that spent a lot of money. But, it was early days in the digital space, and it was a lot of fun. And it was kind of wild, wild west. And so, the lesson for me, to be honest with you, is when things like that happen, you think it's the end of the world. It may be an opening of a door. And that's really what it was for me. I mean, and look, and I also look back at those days. There was nothing like getting your hands in the dirt to learn a trade. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's all part of, your development is becoming an expert in something. So,
And then that's fascinating. I mean, as you transitioned into Camelot, what made you realize that you thought Camelot was in a position that you wanted to go bigger? That you
it's a great
ultimately
question.
thought,
So, well, Tom, the founder of Camelot, Tom Callahar, first of all, one of the kindest, smartest people I know. Tom knew that I had kind of an entrepreneurial streak, and then we'll tap into this. But I also, my family had been in advertising, both my grandfather and my father,
wow.
and so I think Tom saw in me something I didn't see in myself. But the second piece is Tom basically said, "I'll give you legal, I'll give you financials, all the accounting and resources you need." He said, "Go start a digital team." And he said, "I'm going to, be hands off and guide you where you need to be guided and teach you about marketing." But he basically said, "Go start something and figure it out." And that satisfied the startup guy in me. But at the same time, I realized when I got there, I remember the first time I walked in Camelot, they were doing some work on Southwest Airlines and they were doing some customer analysis. And we had a room called the Star Trek room. And it literally had Captain Kirk in it and Spock and several other things, but they had big screens where they were analyzing dots on the map were represented by customers, like click and save customers versus rapid reward customers. And they were looking at trade zones. I'd never seen anything quite like that. And it just sort of blew my head up. And I was like, this is something I can learn.
Wow.
And so I really wanted to, that's the piece of it that was very exciting to me. But what was interesting in those days in digital, it was all about the clicks and the impressions, but nobody was really doing a lot of geo-targeting or thinking through trade zones or thinking through, customer
year was that?
analysis, deep levels, So bringing the art of the offline stuff to the digital world was very intriguing to me.
That's awesome. When you think about that transition from Camelot, PMG, etc., don't you feel like nowadays everything that you went through is just accelerated in such a different way? So how do you try to take what you learned in the past and not overly analyze the future, but balance it? Like what's your mindset there?
Well, so one is, you hear the expression in baseball all the times that people see the game slows down for them. And I would say, having done this for 20 years, I would say there are many aspects of the game that have slowed down. I mean, I don't think I'm the smartest or the best at the game, but I do think I've seen enough, enough hours of the game to kind of know what I'm seeing. And what I would sort of say to you is, having seen the first piece was sort of, desktop digital. Then we saw, social and then mobile and then CTV. And, when you see these cycles of innovation, they all start to look similar. And so I think of them as like waves. And so the way to think about it is you have to decide which waves you're going to ride. And you have to equally decide which waves you don't want to ride. And so over time, it became very clear to me, like you could see something coming. And I would say, I think where I have one skill, that I think is just the willingness to try stuff and fail. And, and I think that's been very helpful. When you see something, that opportunistic approach, that's really what I've tried to take in just about everything I've done. And so, that's what's exciting. I mean, like right now is a good example. We can all see the AI stuff coming, and it's now starting to infiltrate lots of places, in our marketing and media and creative suites. And
And
so
quick
that's very
question
exciting.
on, obviously, on the AI front. I saw, you always talking about how there's no one size fits all strategy for anybody, and that it's critical to be able to be prepared for customized and tailored solutions or bespoke situations. How do you think about that? How do you weave that into your work? What are some of the best places that you've seen success there? And what kind of people do you look for to be able to think like that?
It's a these are all great questions. So one is, so when I got to Camelot, Tom always talked about top down and, marketing versus bottoms up marketing. And I'd say the first piece is the bottoms up marketing is truly, taking client data. And when I'm talking about client data, really customer data and business data. And you got to learn the business and you got to learn the customers. And if you do that, then, the playbook sort of appears to you. And I'll give you some examples of that. And just about every client I've analyzed over the last 20 plus years, even if they're a brand that everyone's heard of, it doesn't mean that they have their national footprint is the same everywhere. And so, typically there's concentrations of customers, either demographically, geographically, so forth, socioeconomically. And so I think that's the first piece is, no two brands are the same. And I think what happened in media for many, many years, there was a line of demarcation around efficiency that you either went national if it looked one way, if you were in 12, 13, 14 DMAs that were heavily penetrated, it made zero sense to go locally. And so, things got very, the line of demarcation was national versus local. In the world of digital, you can make the impressions sort of fall where the customers or the opportunities are, right? And I think that's the first piece. The second piece is, the question is like, over the years, what I found is you don't hire for position, you hire for upside and skill sets. And I always loved what I always called amphibians, people that can do and think, right? And analyze. And what you want are people that enjoy the analytical aspects of what you're doing and then, basically take that analysis and then go action it. And, I always think those kinds of people thrive really well, and they love, not only they love doing the work around the analytical pieces, but they love the doing just as much. And then the other thing is that if you like the doing, you want to be great at your craft. And what I found is when you find those kinds of people, they become real craftspeople. And I think that's the piece that I most admire in our industry is when I find people that are equally, as excited about being masters of the craft as I am. I mean, but I think that's the piece of it is you want to learn the technology and the techniques and all the things you can do to be great at doing that thing, right?
I mean, listen, as I speak to you, we've had some amazing guests on the podcast, and we always kind of look to the different people for different things. One of the things I find extremely unique about you, getting to know you, hopefully more and more over the next few years, is that you're pretty prepared no matter what and confident, right? Would you say that you started out that way, or how did you become stronger in your confidence, your security, your public speaking, and what advice do you have to others that are moving into that lane?
Well, look, no, I can definitely say that's not the case. I would say the first piece is, I always view myself, you heard the expression Groucho Marx always said, he said, I would never join a club that would have me as a member kind of thing. I think the first piece is, I sort of subscribe to that school of thought. But I also think, Tom always told me to speak your mind. But he also said, when you're talking, you're losing. So there's a balance between two things. And I think the first piece is you got to be grounded in facts. And I think if you really understand your craft, that builds a lot of confidence. And I think that's really important. And that, what I would sort of say, when I made the career switch, we were talking about Blockbuster to Camelot, I was in my mid-30s. And I thought that I had missed, the boat. And I think that the first piece is there's no such thing as making a mistake before the age of 90. So, you can,
That's a classic quote. Well, have you taught yourself then to compartmentalize things and not ride the highs and lows as much? Because clearly,
look, I do ride the highs and lows. I'm very emotional about the work and about the people and, about servicing clients. Those are all things. I mean, but what you want to do is play with passion. If you watch sports, you can see that passion, overtake some people. So I think you got to leave it on the field to a certain extent.
speaking of sports, because you're such a big fan, who are your idols?
It's a good question too. So I have two sports that I love. I am a Dallas Cowboys fan, and not a very happy one at the moment.
I'm a Nick Jet Ranger Met fan, so I have nothing to say to you.
Look, I mean, so I grew up, Roger Staubach, Tony Dorsett, Drew Pearson, that era of Cowboys, and of course, the triplets, Aikman, Irvin, and Emmett. I love the Cowboys growing up. I do love watching the Cowboys. They're also a source of a lot of frustration on Monday mornings. My other passion is soccer. So I played, collegiate soccer, was on an Olympic team when I was, and national teams and so forth, and played at a pretty high level of soccer. But as I always remind people, I was a goalie, not an athlete. And so there's a difference between the two. But today I watch a lot of English Premier League soccer, and you ask me about players that I love. I mean, the team I follow is Arsenal, but I love watching international soccer. There's nothing more fun than going to an international game, in some far off place. I mean, I went to Qatar for a World Cup final this past summer. I went to the Euros after, and that was really fun. I mean, I would go anywhere, anytime for, to go see derby of any import, for soccer.
I love that. So kind of closing out here for our audience. I mean, we've learned a lot today about you, about the future, about where things are going. What excites you for PMG going into the next phase of growth, and what excites you that keeps you going, that makes you excited about the future of our industry?
Well, look, we have incredible leadership. George, our CEO, is unbelievable, and he's got great vision around media and tech. And I think I share George's belief that we believe that software at the end of the day is going to be really important to the future, of media and marketing. I like P&G's hand a whole lot. I mean, we're an independent agency. We have no outside investors. We've grown, organically. I'd like to think that we do some things slightly different than our peers. I mean, one, it is a big one for me, is, we don't take principled interest, and we don't mark up media, we don't mark up tech. So one is philosophically, I love our positioning. I mean, we are truly an independent player and can provide. You asked me about confidence. Confidence comes from knowing that you're going to provide a client the best plan you possibly can. And the way you earn your keep is by performing. And so I love the hand that we have. And, PMG is one of 4 companies inside of the Momentum portfolio. We've got 3 other companies that are equally interesting. But I think the other piece is, we're a 14-year-old agency, and we don't have the legacy that a lot of other agencies have. And so, part of when I think about what it's going to take to build a great agency, and one is we've got an incredible platform internally called Alley. And while I don't think it's nearly finished in any way, shape, or form, I like our hand because we know that it's not finished, and we know that we've got to continue to build software and ship software. That's the first piece. I think the second piece is, we love to game and compete. And I think that's the other piece, is that, we're not resting on our laurels. And P&G has a history, similar to Camelot, where we like to, go break and innovate. And it's a little bit of difference between playing offense versus defense. I love being on the offensive side of the ball. And I think that, that's a great hand.
Funny,
I also
funny
think,
for you to wrap up being on the offensive side of the ball when you were a goalie.
no, that's right. Oh, all goalies dream of scoring goals, by the way.
Is that why? Is that
yes.
why I always see Igor Shesterkin on the Rangers trying to shoot from one end to the other?
150%. Are you kidding? Absolutely. But look, I mean, we're entering a really interesting time period in our industry because there's going to be a lot of disruption over the next 2 years. And the reason I think that is a lot of business models, one is, it's a little bit like how I think about Sightly. I mean, you guys were, I don't know, how old are you? That's 3 years, 4 years old, somewhere around there. How old is the company?
The company's around for over a decade, but the platform started in 2020.
So think about what you guys have done in 4 years, and you built an incredible platform. And I think we're in this age where, you're going to be able to build and ship software quickly and build products really quickly that meet market needs. And that's only going to speed up. And, one of my partners said something is like, this is the worst AI is ever going to be, is right now. So when you think about, where that goes, but I think, look, I mean, we're in an amazing time period where a lot of ones you can start to see there's going to be massive consolidation in our business as it relates to media. There's going to be a whole host of new regulatory issues. And of course, AI is going to enter. And so, that mix along with, consumption changes, media changes, there's so much going on. And when there's that kind of disruption going on, that means there's a lot of opportunity. And that's where, to your earlier question, having been around this, it's fun to try to pick the waves to go right in. And there's some big ones coming. And so I'm pretty excited about that.
I'll tell you right now, I'm excited to ride them with you. Our guests are lucky today to have heard all those stories, your humbleness to explain your ups and downs, to understand how you're going to navigate the future, and also just to hear your eagerness to continue to learn. I think it's super cool. So thank you, Sam, so much for joining us today. I'm honored to have had you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate it.
You're the best.
Hi, I'm Hannah, one of the producers for Sightly's Breaking Through the Mayhem podcast. We want to thank you so much for listening to the show. If you want to learn more about the guests we had on today, we included additional information about them in the show notes. Finally, if you'd like to be on the podcast, or if you know someone that would make a great fit, you could fill out the form at sightly.com/podcast. We hope you have a great day.